Welcome back to another episode of Virteva's Let's Talk podcast, the show that analyzes the newest technologies in Microsoft Cloud and how to manage those technologies to help your business teams be successful. It's episode 12, and we're once again joined by Holly Peterson, our Microsoft Training and Enablement Lead. And in this week's episode, we're going to be talking about Microsoft Loop, what it is, why does it matter, and we're also going to be demoing kind of like a starter's guide on how you can start to not only use Loop components, but start to use the new Microsoft Loop Workspace app that's coming to the Windows Store. It's in preview right now. And there's a version that you can actually enable in your tenant today to use basically a web app of it. So we're going to be going through that, talking through it, and giving a little bit of kind of like, free insight and training on it. Before we begin, though, I wanted to remind our listeners that if you haven't already, please toss us a like, subscribe, or follow on either our YouTube video page or inside your podcast app of choice. It's very helpful in helping promote the show, and it only takes a few moments, so it's greatly appreciated. For our audio-only listeners, this is going to be a great episode to check out our YouTube page, as there is going to be that visual demo content. So if you haven't checked us out over there on YouTube yet, you can find us at Virteva. All right. Welcome back to the show, Holly. How have you been?
I've been great. Been traveling around for a few customers and excited to be back at my home base. I'm definitely excited about today's topic because it's one of those new, it really reminds me of when Teams was brand new.
Mm-hmm.
I think people had a lot of question marks over their heads over what really is this? What is this for? So it's exciting to be kind of on the precipice of something big with this great new tool.
Yep. So outside of work, how the rest of your summer goes, beginning of the school year, vacations are coming to an end. Like we just passed Labor Day, football started.
Yeah.
Like what have you been doing outside?
I heard, I've been making trips back to my home state of Minnesota. Settled in back here though in Santa Barbara for school. Kids are loving it. I want to also extend my sincere condolences to you. I heard you had Aaron Rodgers on your fantasy football team.
Mm-hmm.
He, made it a whole 4 plays. Yep. So way to go.
Double killer for me. So you're originally from Minnesota. You're out in Santa Barbara now in California. I'm from Buffalo, New York. I spent 2 separate visits out there, 2 different weeks in Minnesota the last month or so. But I came back home super excited for football. I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. Bills played the Jets. They injured my fantasy quarterback, and I only needed like 16 points to win. And then the Bills also lost that game because Josh Allen played hero ball for two straight periods or quarters. And yeah, it's a rough week here in Buffalo. But I mean, I think that Minnesota is kind of in the same shape with the Vikings. They also lost their opener.
We're all kindred spirits in Minnesota, and for the Vikings and the Bills, most Super Bowl appearances with no win. Always wondering if it's someday.
Yep. We're 2 of like 10 teams that haven't won a Super Bowl yet, so it'll happen someday.
I know. I've just the sands in the hourglass are getting low for some of us.
Yeah, big sads. Okay. So you mentioned in the good segue that last time we were on the show, we were talking about Teams Premium. We had some stuff that we still wanted to get to on Teams 2.0, including the new features and the avatar stuff. We're not going to talk about that stuff today, but I thought with Copilot general availability probably coming at the end of this year, beginning of next,
yep.
I keep seeing more and more ideas in my head for where these Loop components are going to plug in and how Copilot might end up using some of these Loop components. So I thought that this was a really good opportunity to talk about Loop. We actually demoed it I've demoed it a few times this year for different clients, but we brought it up at a workshop back in July, and they were super confused about it. And I've been seeing Microsoft doing a good, solid push on it right now on their socials. And I've also seen a lot of other kind of like MVPs and influencers out there doing the same. And I thought this was a good opportunity for us to give our take on it, which is where we came to today. So before we start, I think that it makes a lot of sense for me to actually talk about what is Loop, who is Loop for, and why is it so important. And then from there, we can transition it over and let you do some demos, and we can kind of talk through the life cycle of starting at a component and then actually moving it into like more of a collaborative workspace area. So
sounds great.
What is Microsoft Loop? A little thing at the top of the screen here is asking us what it is. So Loop is Microsoft's kind of next generation co-creation experience. And that sounds very marketing focused, but back in the day when Office 365 and cloud started to become more and more of a thing, and you could kind of collaborate in different apps and people could co-create and author in Excel documents and Word documents, that was kind of the beginning of the concept of what Loop is trying to achieve. What Loop is doing is it's taking that co-creation area to the next step by letting you be able to kind of plug these different components into different apps like Word and Whiteboard and Outlook, and even now kind of like the collaborative app that they have out there. And when someone updates something in Word, it updates it in your app. And when they update it in Outlook, it updates into your Word or your Whiteboard document. So it's really cool because you don't all need to be in the same document to be able to work together on different projects and different initiatives. So it allows, as Microsoft says, it allows teams to think, plan, and create together. It's very similar to Notion. So if you're an audience viewer or listener and you've experimented with Notion before, very similar concept. I always like to call back that a lot of these products like Notion and even things like Confluence and Jira and Basecamp, they all kind of like their roots all kind of grew out of Google Wave back in like the late 2000s or early 2010s. Google Wave is one of those products that, Google really pushes for about a year and then it just ends up in the Google graveyard. But it's interesting because we're seeing like Microsoft and Notion take those ideas and build them into something bigger. And Microsoft's a little bit behind the ball on this because Notion's been around for a while and I think most people are familiar with it. But again, when you're looking at return on investment strategy and you're paying for separate Notion licenses, but you're already all in on E3 or E5, it makes a lot of sense to just start looking at, hey, how can we use Loop? Where does it fall short? Where is it doing things that Notion isn't? And then start to understand from a return on investment strategy where you can really take advantage of that stuff. So very long-winded on what it is. For who it is it's really for anyone. If you're working on projects, you're brainstorming ideas together, you're planning events, Loop can help you organize all your thought and content, again, into kind of like that one spot or that one component. And then again, it works across the board in Teams and Outlook and Word and Whiteboard. And I'm sure that there are more coming. Like we saw Excel Live come earlier this year. I was like, oh, that looks a heck of a lot like a Loop component, but not quite yet. But it'll probably get there, right? So Microsoft's going to continue building on this. And if you're watching kind of like the Copilot demos that Microsoft's been showing off, a lot of those Copilot demos look a heck of a lot like Loop components. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see it start to play a big role there as well. And then last piece, why is it important? I kind of already talked on like the return on investment strategy, but really it's all about giving people one or two kind of single panes of glass that they can go to do all of their stuff rather than have to sort through a billion different apps out there in the Microsoft ecosystem to do stuff. Like this is kind of like that concept again of like Office Insights in Delve that we've talked about before. Is Delve's a great tool because it helps you find all the stuff that you've been working on with other people. But should you even really have to do that? Like, couldn't you just embed a Loop component into a Word document or in the future on like a SharePoint page and all that stuff is just seamlessly updating? I think that getting a little off topic from just kind of like security controls and permissions management, security controls were one of the biggest things that like I think kind of slowed Loop progression down from coming more into the mainstream. Sure. Microsoft says is that very similar to Copilot, they've kind of nipped that in the bud at this point and they're in a better spot. I think that the biggest holdback for Loop now, at least in my opinion, is just kind of absorbing what it is conceptually and how you use it, and even understanding
Right.
that, yes, there is actually version control on those loop components. So when you're collaborating and everybody's changing things, like if you put a loop component into an email, and this came up in our workshop a few months ago, is you could say, hey, these are all of the agenda items for this. What's to stop someone from going in and changing those agenda items? Some of the things that Microsoft's done and that we'll see today is that when someone changes something, it actually highlights that it was changed and shows you who changed it and when. So
Right.
I think we covered the who, what, why, where, and when. I think that this is a great opportunity to kind of turn it over to the demo. But before we kind of move over to that, is there anything that you wanted, anything that I missed?
Really, I think you kind of nailed it in that last comment, is figuring out how we're going to put it to use. It's a big concept tool, but I think of this moment where Loop is kind of, it's, components have been out there for a while, but not pages and workspaces the way that we're sort of seeing them now in preview. But I'm constantly reminded of what a team is in Teams, and how hard it was for some of us to get our arms around what that is and how we fit it into our day to day, and if we need to use it. Loop is now expanding the boundaries of that landscape a little bit more. And so if you're in a group, you're in an organization, you're in a department, project team, whatever it is, and you haven't really even gotten your arms around what is a team and why do we need to use a team, this can feel a little bit like, you're drowning and someone just, handed you a brick.
Yep.
A little bit. So I guess the one thing I would add is just on the adoption curve, is if you're in an organization or a department that just is still struggling with even some of the core concepts, and even publishing and making available for use some of the kind of core pieces of Microsoft 365, and you don't feel like you've gotten your arms around all of that, and now we're adding in something new, I would say there isn't necessarily you know something I could tell you that will make you feel better. I can tell you there are a lot of organizations that struggle to get, move beyond the basics, because there's a lot here.
Yep.
But the fact that Teams has been around now for a while, and they're going to fold in another new piece. I used to say all the time, Teams will not be the last Teams that Microsoft gives us. Loop will not be the last Loop. So hopefully today we'll show you some practical ways to take advantage of using some of these tools so that you can continue your adoption journey. Because if you want to get the most out of what you're paying for out of Microsoft, you have to keep going. You have to keep encompassing and enveloping these tools into your organization.
Yep. Yeah. You couldn't have said it better. I couldn't have said it better myself. As training and enablement is really what makes this successful. Is if you just throw this at a group of people and expect them to be able to figure it out, maybe 2 of the 10 will. And that you're not really getting a good return on investment there, especially if you're moving away from other products. Like, you have to understand the basics first. And that's what Microsoft, I think, has been prepping for in order to start getting into more of the intermediate and advanced areas.
Yeah.
All right. So let's take it over to the demo here. So we are at our demo screen here. So Holly, I'll let you kind of lead here, and then I'll kind of interject with questions, or if you want to bounce something off me, we can talk through it there. So go ahead.
That sounds great. So one of the things that I like to do when we're leading off on these demos, I want you to see Loop as a brand new way of being able to work and collaborate with one another. But sometimes it helps to rewind the clock and think about, how have we historically been doing this? So let's talk pre-Microsoft 365. And in fact, if you haven't changed, even if you're on Microsoft 365, you're not changing what you're doing, you might have something like this. So I'm signed in here as Patty. She's got a document here. It's a an agenda for an all hands meeting, and she's probably collaborating with some of these folks in her organization to build this together, to build this agenda. In the past, Patty might have attached this as a copy to an email, sent it out to some people in their organization and said, make your changes and send those back to me. And people are, saving that document down, adding their edits, reattaching it to an email, sending it back to Patty. And as we all probably have experienced, that's a versioning nightmare. If we do that a couple of times, we've all got like 20 copies of this document. So that's kind of like primordial soup version. Along came Microsoft 365, and as Scott mentioned, we have kind of that ability to use cloud collaboration. So Patty could start this document, share it with people, using the share option, share it as a link. Everyone can come in to that document. We can make our changes and we can work together. So it's good in that Patty's still sending that, she's sending that email out. She's got a link. Maybe at some point that became a Teams chat, but we're still sharing a document link to build this collaboration, collaborative agenda. Now, Loop takes us kind of one step, it's almost like pre-document. So in all of these examples, Patty is starting with a message, an email, a chat saying, hey, we need to work on this agenda together. What if it wasn't a document at all that we're working on? A loop component is sort of almost like a building block of a piece of a document. So I want you to think of them as just, it's a piece of content. So I'll just say here, I've got an email up and I'm going to email Nestor this agenda. And rather than create this document and take the time to format it and do all this stuff, the building block really are these bullet points. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just copy these bullet points. I know this is kind of in a table format, so we'll see how that works. But I want to start with that same message. And instead of just pasting in this bulleted list, I'm going to insert a loop component. So you all should, or most organizations, if you have loop enabled, you could see this loop components button in a new email message. You can even see it in a chat, and I'll show you. But I'm just going to insert an agenda because that's actually what we're going to try and build. And I'm going to put that agenda in. And Microsoft essentially is creating this little standalone component. And we can use this building block all over. It could be in the final document, but we can all work from this one box. We could work on it together in the email. I could paste it into a chat into someone to someone else. So let's see if I can add those in. Of course, it's going to give me grief here. So let me quickly grab these two items.
Yeah, and just while you're grabbing that too, I wanted to call out that because I'm a big fan of like keyboard shortcuts and mouse shortcuts and macros. Is if you just use a / it actually will help you format the document as well, which is really nice.
Yes. So I've got a couple of agenda items in here, and I'm going to now send this to Nestor. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to copy it. All right. So I'm going to copy this component. So now in my document, which I have open in Word Online, because my document is my loop component, I can insert a link to my loop component in a document in Word desktop, but I can actually work with it here um, in Word Online. So I can see it. It's going to look the same there. So basically, I want you to see that in this email I just sent to Nestor, as well as the document with the loop component, we have this building block. So this piece of content, it's an agenda. And the agenda, Nestor could actually maybe just open up that email and say, all right, I'm going to start adding in agenda topics. And it's going to update for me when I even look at my sent item. Or if I've now pasted that same agenda into this Word document in Word Online, if Nestor starts making changes, I'm going to see it there as well. So if you want to add in maybe one more agenda item, we're going to see it in, there we go. So we see it in both places. Now it feels a little weird. Like why would I want to, go back to a sent item in my email and see the changes that Nestor is making? Really, the point is to say this component, it's just a portable piece of content, and I can continue to copy and paste it. I could use it in a team. I could use it in a loop workspace, no matter who is updating it where. So maybe I've got this document shared with 3 different people. No matter who's making changes to it, we can see what's being updated.
A good call out
So
too is that, so if you send an email directly to Nestor and you asked him to update the agenda topics, but he had a question that he didn't want to see, he didn't want the rest of the members of that loop component to see, is he going to respond out of line of the loop component to you directly,
yeah,
but he can update the loop component for the others to see when he has more clarity. And he could do the same thing in Teams as well. So don't feel like you're locked into only being able to have conversations in the loop component. The loop
yeah.
component is just an extra layer of that puzzle.
Right. And this is just one kind of use case, right? I can insert, so rather than creating a document, sharing it, then having a conversation and a document be kind of these separate things, let's look at it in chat as
Mm-hmm.
well. So same thing. If I have a message that I want to start, or that conversation, we thought it's time to think about the all hands. And we're having a back and forth conversation. Why leave that conversation to begin our planning? So it's not just an agenda that we have to plan. We maybe have a task list. We have other things that we need to brainstorm. And like I said, it's all about thinking, planning, creating together. So don't ever think of, sometimes people will say, well, am I supposed to now, instead of sharing a document, I'm supposed to share a loop component? No, not every time. It's just to say this creates a really streamlined way of collaborating on document like components, but in the flow of a conversation. So here I'm actually going to see, now Nestor is sharing a loop component with me, and we've got some different ideas. All right, I want a new venue. Okay. And this is like a pros and cons list. So we can go in, oh, it's a voting table, and we can go in and do some different votes.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe Nestor and I are going to collaborate on this here. We're going to say, let's come up with some new ideas, get some pros and cons between the two of us. And then later on, I'm going to copy and share this component to a larger group. Let's say in an email or in another format. So we've kind of just we've stripped away the package around a component, which, again, could be a document of some sort, and said, hey, let's come up with some ideas. And just to show you in chat, when you want to insert a loop component, you can do this in a chat, just mid conversation, rather than replying back and forth or stepping aside from your chat and creating that document and sharing a link. You can say, let's build this bulleted list together, a checklist, numbered lists. What Scott just inserted here was a voting table. We even have task lists that we could even sync to a plan in Planner. It's really cool. So lots of things that we can create here. If you want to see where a component is available, you can click on the shared locations, and we basically can see here. We could open it in a couple different places. We could even add this to a loop workspace. So that's kind of the next kind of venue that I want to talk about. So again, components, you could just kind of go forward adding components to conversations, right? It's like, hey, we need to do more than just have a conversation, but I don't want to leave this conversation and create the wrapper of a document around this. I want to just build here.
And this is the point in time whenever I demo these that the hands all go up at the same time. Yep. Where do these loop components live?
I was just thinking that. So loop components, when you're creating them back and forth, live in OneDrive. So unless you're kind of building them in a shared venue, they live in OneDrive. So eventually, this component, we might need to move that component or put it in a shared space. But I like that they start in OneDrive in general, because that's kind of what I see as the life cycle of a document in Microsoft 365, right? I start something and we kind of build together. So that's kind of where I want you to think about these. They live in OneDrive. You'll see them when you create them. Of course, like anything, Microsoft 365, if you go into, let's say, Word Online, Excel Online, now entering a loop component, it doesn't ask you where you want to store it in OneDrive. It just lands in the root of OneDrive, which
it does go into a folder. So for the one that I created, it goes into a Microsoft Teams chat files. And I think that the beauty too of it living either in OneDrive or SharePoint is that it is governed by the security principles that you put in place in Defender. So you can create policies around that. You can allow it to kind of just hit the default policies. But yeah, anything that you have in OneDrive, anything that you have in SharePoint is going to be managed by those permission sets that you put in place. And you can go as restrictive or as less restrictive as you want on that.
Right. And this is one of those things too, and I'm just going to click on the, see who has access. One of the things to keep in mind is just like any link that you create from a document, also those default sharing capabilities in your organization are going to govern this as well. So typically when I go in and lead training at organizations, bigger organizations, the default setting is set to either people in my organization or specific people. It's not going to be something that by default could be, shared outside of your organization. So really consider these as kind of internal collaboration tools if you're a lot like other organizations that I work with.
And that's a good call out too, Holly, is right now, at least to my understanding, because I haven't shared these externally in a bit, loop components are only available within your organization. So if you try to open up a loop component with another external organization and you don't have any sort of like external identity sharing, whether it be B2B collaboration or B2B sharing, like they won't be able to see this. They'll click on it. It'll be a link to them and they won't have access to it. So this is great in org right now, but if you want to share it outside of org, you are going to have to take some additional steps I'm sure Microsoft will expand on this in the future, but generally the way that it's very similar to kind of like Teams Connect or shared channels right now. There are some extra steps on your side and on the other side if you want to play with this externally.
Right. And I think right now, I'm just going to check on this right now. Loop is chat only. So this is not something that I would create in a Teams post. But correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I believe that you're right, is that it's chat only, but there is the intention to bring it to channels.
Right.
I'm going to verify that here real quick too in my, because I have the preview version of Teams to see if they've added it yet.
Okay. Because that's kind of one other question. So aside from where are Loop components stored, so I always tell people they're not documents, right? It's not a Word document, it's not an Excel document, but it's still a thing that has version control. And those things live in OneDrive by default if you're creating a Loop component. And there isn't the way, from my perspective as someone who's in just the general availability client, I'm not going to see a Loop components in my Teams posts.
So I'm looking at the roadmap here, and this is the fun part about doing these live is Loop component polls for Microsoft Forums are going to be coming in October. That's the beginning of that rollout. Creating loop tables and tasks and whiteboard, which is something that I'm actually pretty excited about and been waiting for.
Yes.
That's coming this month in September. The rollout begins. And then they are also in the process of adding loop components to Planner as well, which is another tool that I use fairly frequently in my day-to-day. So very excited about that stuff as well. As far as loop components directly in channels, I do not see that on the roadmap just yet. But I know that I have heard it actually get talked about. So it's probably coming within like the next 6 to 12 months.
All right. Well, I think the next frontier. So loop components, something that generally most people should be able to use within their organization. So look at your message toolbar in Outlook. So when you're opening a new email or you're starting a new chat to a coworker, you should see that loop icon and you can insert a component into a message. But I actually want to talk about workspaces now. So here I am on a kind of a page here. So I'm going to back up and I want to talk about these kind of the Loop app and Loop workspaces and pages. So components can live in a lot of formats, right? I could have a Loop component in an email back and forth. I could have it in a document, in a chat. I don't know any other bingo squares you want to call out, Scott, but I can have a component that lives in a lot of different places. And no matter who's looking at that component, whether I choose to look at it in the email or someone else is looking at that same component in a chat, we can all see it update in real time. The next range out from a component is a page. This is where the Loop app comes in.
And this is where it's going to be most similar to Notion. So I think Microsoft baby stepped into it with components in different apps. And this is where it starts to get really powerful. So when I'm playing with Loop and I'm working with and collaborating with different groups, I am actually just going straight to this for the most part now, unless I have something in a chat that I want to collaborate on, because this allows me to create kind of like powerful pages and workspace areas where I can take everything that we just talked about and put it into almost kind of like a web page based format so I can scroll through. So if I'm working on like contracts or proposals, or I'm working on different task-based items, I want to keep track of everything in one place and I don't want to have to jump to 3 or 4 different apps. This is perfect for that. But this, again, you need to understand the foundations before you can jump up to kind of like this bigger platform, because this is where and Microsoft understands this, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it. Like they've built in the ability that when you build out a new workspace page or a new, so you have workspaces and pages, they give you the ability to actually, when you create a page, use built-in templates to build that out for you. Because it would be very hard to just look at a white piece of paper and say, oh, well, here we go. I know how to use this. I'm going to figure it out. This is no problem at all. So the templates really help get you started. And then once you feel comfortable, then you can kind of go off and do the thing that you want to do.
Yep. So let's actually talk about that. It's kind of like I always feel like it's really easy to talk about a component, kind of it's a standalone piece of content. But what is a workspace and a page? This is where those two things are very intertwined. So we're going to jump to the outer ring first and talk about workspaces. So think of a Loop workspace a little bit. Again, we're going to be touching a lot of like stepping on the toes of a lot of applications, concept, things like that you already understand in Microsoft 365. But a workspace is just that. It's a place for you to collaborate, collect. So that's kind of one of those things I tend to think about, a collection of many things in a workspace. So I've got a collection of ideas. Some of those ideas are just me typing, pasting things in, adding in a document link. And then there's other things that are I do have shared with other people. We're collaborating on them. So that's kind of one of those things. So a workspace is like a collection of all sorts of Loop components and Loop pages. And those components, again, would live on a page. So I have a workspace here. It's called My Workspace. And this was actually created by another person and shared with me. I'm going to just we're going to start from a blank page. So I'm going to add in a new page. And as Scott mentioned, a page in a Loop workspace can start from one of many templates. So you're going to see some things listed below here. We can go into the template gallery itself. I think Microsoft does a really good job now of allowing you to preview a template. Hopefully this
bad idea brainstorm. We should definitely use bad idea brainstorm.
The bad idea brainstorm, right? So build a terrible food delivery app. Aren't they all? So here we can go in and look at one of these templates. Just because what you want to create isn't represented by a template here doesn't mean you can't start with one of these templates. So I'm going to use a stand-up meeting template. Now, maybe I just like the content, the format, the layout here, but if what I'm building a page on isn't a stand-up meeting, this isn't like the game of Operation where a buzzer sounds if you do something that isn't exactly aligned. Yeah, I'm going to use the stand-up meeting template because I like the format, I like the components. It's a good starting place for me. But I'm going to change a bunch of it. By the end of what I created, it might not be a stand-up meeting page. It's going to be for something else. So that's something that I like to tell you all is use one of the templates.
Yeah, you're not locked in at all. Like all it does is it drops a bunch of kind of those / command areas in for you. If you like it, run with it. If you don't like it, you can remove it. You can keep the things that you do like.
So I'm going to actually change this title right off the bat. And I'm just going to call this All Hands Planning. And here it's saying, use this template, great. That's just instructions. I can get rid of that. I don't need to keep that. I can add in a meeting date here if I want to, or I can just, remove that component altogether. But I can go through and add these things in. So on every page, I want you to kind of understand there's a couple cool things. And this is something Microsoft has leaned really heavily into. They've brought in all of the stock images that you can use in SharePoint Online. So I'll just update that. You've got a little cover icon. Microsoft is loving the emojis. So we'll add that one here. and I can just go in and start adding in pieces and collaborating with anyone else that has access to this workspace. So you'll see both Patty and Nestor are here going in and planning these things. And if there's a new component, loop component, I want to add, and we'll just do this at the same time, I'm going to type in a forward slash. So underneath scope, I actually like to use a bulleted list in order to, you know, kind of outline our scope. All right. So we must have, um, you know, a certain number of workshops and meetings. And I want us to have a written summary, and we can go in and keep adding and collaborating. Now, like I said, this looks a lot like a document, but it's not really a document. Maybe several of these things are things that we might put into a document. We might say later on, this component should live in a formal kind of Word document status report, but we can build it here and we can collaborate here. Or for some of us, this just might be our workspace where we work. I find this to be a super, uh, it's just a really great place to work without boundaries, the typical boundaries that I see in a document. So one thing to keep in mind is Microsoft has what I call canvases. A lot of things that are kind of like a canvas you can work in. OneNote is a good canvas. Whiteboard is a good canvas, and Loop, Pages, and kind of workspace, and even a component itself is a great
Yep.
canvas to work
And I just
from.
wanted to call out too, and I've been adding some notes in as you've been talking, but like Microsoft is really leaning into the collaborative aspect of this. So you can see as Nestor, like I actually left a comment if you click on those two little speech bubbles down there, and I actually was able, so you can do replies in line to the comment. You can react with emojis. Um, and quite a bit more there. So they're really encouraging you, like as you put these together and you have teams read through them and they have questions, to collaborate and continue to build those documents into the perfect form. One of the other common questions that we get on these too is like, is there a way that once I have a finalized loop document that I can pick the whole thing up and put it into an email in static form? Because I don't want anyone to change anything. And yes, the answer is you can basically do a select all and move that into an email. So if you needed to send it to your CTO or your CIO or even just a manager or director, and you didn't want them to have access to the collaboration element of it, they can still see everything else that's there.
And I'm just going to do that really quickly just to give a demonstration. Here, I just copied and pasted everything. It kept the kind of nice little emoji and kind of some of the
Yep.
formatting, but you'll notice it didn't pull in. So I did a select all. It didn't pull in the comment conversation. It didn't pull in our, emoji reactions, the type of thing that maybe wouldn't make sense in contextual sense to someone who's just getting an email
Mhm.
of this. So I think that's really cool because it allows you to kind of still work very much out in the open in a kind of informal way, but quickly grab that kind of formal write up and paste it somewhere else. So, good point. I think it's good to see it in action as well. So, the last thing that I would kind of add on Loop, and this is just one of those things. Again, if you feel like you're already, you're drowning in change, you're doing everything you can, and it feels like you're drowning and someone just handed you a brick that says loop on it. um, I don't want to give people a sense of, it's okay, you can ignore this, or like, don't bite off more than you can chew. I think it's really important for you to understand that loop is not the end. And as Scott mentioned, it's going to be a part of Copilot. In fact, I thought the same thing when they were doing the Copilot demos and they're showing kind of that sort of AI chat. Um, I think loop components are going to be a part of
Yeah, for
that.
sure.
So it's really important to say, like, I want everyone to know that I can empathize and I see where it can be very overwhelming, but these tools really truly represent functionality and features that people in your organization, maybe not everyone, but some, want to take advantage of. And it's really up to us to learn them, know what they are, figure out how they can be used in our organizations, and we can offer them as solutions to people having particular business problems and therefore getting the most out of what we pay for our licensing. So I know this is a lot of change, and you might even be thinking, I don't know how I would use Loop, therefore maybe no one would need to use it.
Mhm.
If you have people today that are in your organizations, if they're developers, they're product owners, they're project managers, I guarantee you this could be something that would be a big game changer for
Yep,
them.
absolutely. Very well said. And one last call out too on this is you've noticed probably watching the video is a lot of what we've been demoing right now. It sure looks like it's only in a web version, right? Well, Microsoft is on a journey right now where you're seeing with they do a lot of the development web first on like web Word, web Excel, Teams, and then it starts to transition itself down more to those desktop apps. So even with the new version of Outlook that's going to be coming, it's in preview right now and it's going to be rolling out over the
Yep.
next couple of years. They're really probably going to start pushing more heavily on it, I think, at the beginning of next year. That's when you'll see a loop kind of come more into the traditional, like I clicked the desktop icon and it opened up Outlook.
Yep.
Microsoft, it's so much easier to develop for one app than develop for four. So we're seeing a big push towards kind of like these web and container-based apps, just because they're a lot more agile than the 25-year-old version of Outlook that's still using COM add-ons that are highly exploitable. But
Yes. Yes.
so that's what you've been seeing today. That's what you should be prepared for as you start playing with some of this stuff and
Right.
wonder, well, why don't I see a way to do this in Word? Or why don't I see a way to do it in Outlook? It's because it's in the web versions right now, but it is going to be very quickly starting to move its way into
Right.
these new kind of like web first apps that they're developing.
Yeah, and I think getting to know your web apps is a task for any license holder, whether you're a frontline license who really only works in the web-based applications, or you're an E-level license that has the desktop apps. Getting to know the web apps is going to be important, especially for those of you who have switched on the new Outlook and have taken a look at it. We've, the cat's out of the bag. It's like the web version of Outlook on the web,
It is
So you're
getting much better. I sat in on a meeting like about a week ago, I think it was, where they were talking about the new Outlook. They were talking about the timeline. We do a whole podcast on this.
yeah,
But there is a feedback button built into when you try to switch back and it's asking you why you're switching. Fill out
yep,
that feedback and let them know, because they are
yep,
driving their change control right now off of user feedback as they
right,
look to move into the future with that app. So it's very important that you leave
right.
feedback.
And I always give people the push. There's some really cool things that have been, as you mentioned, they're going to develop on the web first. It's more agile. Um, and there's some cool things that you can do in Outlook on the web um, that you can't do on Outlook on the desktop. So if
Yep.
you've been hungry for some of those new whiz bang features, then um, give Outlook on the web a try. Uh, I was I'm one of those people, and this is because I'm a trainer on these tools, that I think the new Outlook didn't pose much of a challenge to me, but that's because I've been using the two interchangeably for years and years. But I can see if someone has never, had the need to use Outlook on the web and they've only used Outlook desktop, it's a big leap. So,
Yep.
prepare yourself by going out and using Outlook on the web. I think you'll like some of the cool things that you'll find.
Training and enablement all over again, Holly. We started the show
Yep.
talking about it, and somehow we ended the show talking about it.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. So we're at about time. I wanted to thank Holly you again for being on the show. Always appreciate you having you on. And we're definitely going to talk more about some of this stuff in the future. Like I said, I think we could dedicate a whole episode to just walking through kind of the new Outlook journey. And we've still got to get back to Teams 2.0 and avatars. We'll probably get back to that sooner than later because the new Teams 2.0 should be rolling out here. I believe they're saying October now. So fingers crossed.
I really want it. I'm begging. I check some of my
ironically enough, I've had access to it. Ironically enough, I've had access to it since March, but I'm not using it because it doesn't support NDI, which is what we actually use to push the video out of Teams into how we record these the video podcasts. So we'll get there soon. It's on their roadmap.
Yep. I'm really excited for that.
But once again, thank you again, Holly. For the audience, if you liked what you heard today and saw today, you want to learn more about Microsoft Loop, you can visit Microsoft's website to read more about it on their support page. Or if you're looking for more of a hands-on, more of a training and enablement perspective on it, is Virteva. We're certainly here to help with that stuff. As always, if you have any questions or need help with implementing Loop, or any other Microsoft 365 features and technologies, you can contact Virteva. We are a leading IT managed service and security provider and can help you with all your IT needs. You can email us at letstalk@virteva.com or visit our website at www.virteva.com. Want even more Microsoft news? Sign up for our Microsoft 365 newsletter. It's actually, I think the next copy of it's going out here tomorrow. It recaps a handful of topics, much shorter than this podcast. So you can kind of read it as you get to start your month. If you missed our AMA podcast last month as well, you can check that out on our audio only feed right now. So you'll have to go to your podcast app of choice for that. We do plan on bringing that over onto the YouTube channel in the coming weeks. So if you're a video only person, there will be a version of that up probably by November, I'd imagine. That's it for the show. I wanted to thank everyone again for tuning in to Virteva's Let's Talk podcast. And if you made it this far, please don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons. That's it. Have a great day. Bye.